In the deep rainforests of Chiapas, there are stone monuments where the carving stops halfway through a glyph. The lines are sharp, suggesting the artist put down his chisel intending to return, yet he never did. By the 10th century, the great cities of the southern lowlands, once home to millions, had become ghost towns. The noise of busy markets and temple ceremonies was replaced by the silence of the forest. This was not a mysterious disappearance caused by supernatural forces. It was a very real, very human disaster where the food ran out. The water reservoirs turned to dust, and the divine kings lost their mandate to rule. Welcome back to the Earthen Dawn. Today, we confront the Great Maya Collapse. This event was not a singular moment of destruction, but a slow, agonizing systemic failure. We will analyze how a civilization capable of mapping the stars and building sky-high pyramids engineered its own downfall through environmental overreach and political warfare, offering a stark warning from the past that echoes into the present. To understand the fall, we must first understand the height. A common misconception is that the ancient Maya lived in perfect, mystical harmony with a pristine jungle. The reality of the late Classic period, roughly 750 AD, was radically different. The southern lowlands were not a green wilderness, but a highly engineered, anthropocentric landscape pushed to its absolute physical limit. The scale of Maya civilization at its peak was staggering. Recent LiDAR surveys have stripped away the tree canopy to reveal an urban sprawl that connects city to city. In the core regions around Tikal and Calakmul, population density rivaled that of modern-day Los Angeles or rural China. Historians estimate that in the most improved agricultural areas, the density soared to between 500 and 700 people per square mile. This was a demographic pressure cooker. To feed this exploding population, the Maya could not rely on simple slash-and-burn farming. They were forced to terraform the earth itself. They drained vast swamps to create chinampas, or raised fields, which allowed for multiple harvests a year. They carved terraces into the steep limestone hills to capture soil and water. This was an agricultural marvel, comparable to the rice terraces of Asia, but it created a fragile dependency. The success of this system became its own trap. To maintain the massive cities, the demand for resources was insatiable. They needed timber for construction and firewood for cooking. Crucially, they needed to burn immense amounts of green wood to produce the lime plaster that coated their pyramids and plazas. The result was massive, systematic deforestation. The evidence of this environmental overreach is buried in the earth in a geological layer known as Maya clay. In the lake beds of the Petén region, scientists find this thick stratum of eroded soil. It represents the topsoil that was stripped from the deforested hillsides by rain, washing down to clog the rivers and silence the agricultural productivity of the valleys. By the 8th century, the Maya were walking a razor's edge. They had stripped their natural defenses, leaving a civilization of millions entirely dependent on a regular rainfall that was about to disappear. This ecological time bomb was strapped to a political system that was uniquely vulnerable to failure. The Maya city-states were not ruled by secular emperors, but by figures known as Kuhul, Ajo, or divine holy lords. These kings were the axis mundi, the living pivot between the natural world and the supernatural realm. Their legitimacy did not rest solely on military strength or bloodline, but on a spiritual contract. The king performed the sacred bloodletting rituals, and in return, the gods provided rain and harvest. When the ecosystem began to falter, this divine contract unraveled. As crop yields declined and the rains became erratic, the failure was not seen merely as a weather event. It was interpreted as a failure of the king himself. The Kuhula Jaw had lost the favor of the gods. In a society where political power was inextricably linked to agricultural abundance, a drought was not just a natural disaster. It was a delegitimization of the entire ruling class. Compounding this crisis of faith was a structural rot within Maya society. The proliferation of elites. By the 8th century, the aristocracy had ballooned in size. There were too many secondary lords, cousins of kings, and minor nobles, all demanding the trappings of status, such as jade, cacao, fine ceramics, and elaborate palaces. The burden of supporting this top-heavy, non-producing class fell squarely on the shoulders of an increasingly desperate peasantry. Archaeologists see the evidence of this anxiety in what is often called the theater state. As real power and stability waned, the kings paradoxically ramped up their displays of grandeur. They commissioned more stelae, built larger temples, and held more elaborate public spectacles. This was not the confidence of a golden age. It was a desperate overcompensation. The rulers were frantically trying to project an image of control and favor with the gods, building monuments to their own glory. Even as the foundations of their society, the soil and the faith of the people, crumbled beneath them. Into this fragile, socially fractured world came the catalyst that would shatter the civilization. A climatic disaster of biblical proportions. For decades, historians debated the role of climate change, but recent paleoclimatology has provided irrefutable evidence. By analyzing gypsum concentrations in sediment cores from Lake Chichankanab, scientists have reconstructed a precise timeline of rainfall that correlates chillingly with the archaeological record of the collapse. The data reveals not just a general drying trend, but a series of intense, multi-year megadroughts that struck like hammer blows. The timeline identifies 3 distinct drought peaks, centered roughly around 810, 860, and 910 AD. These dates align almost perfectly with the 3 major phases of city abandonment. The geography of the southern lowlands made this fatal. Unlike the civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia, which were fed by the mighty Nile or Tigris-Euphrates rivers, the great Maya cities of the Payten had no major river systems to rely on. They were entirely dependent on seasonal rainfall captured in immense, plaster-lined reservoirs. When the rains failed, the lifeline was cut. Imagine the scene at Tikal during the peak of the drought in 860 AD. The great reservoirs, capable of holding millions of gallons, began to recede. The water, once clear and plentiful, turned into stagnant, shallow pools. Concentrated pollutants and algae blooms would have made the remaining water toxic, turning the city's life support system into a breeding ground for disease. However, it is crucial to Understand that drought alone did not kill the Maya. Droughts had happened before, and the civilization had survived. But this time, the environmental shock hit a society that had stripped away its ecological buffer through deforestation and was paralyzed by a rigid, failing political hierarchy. The drought was the spark, but the explosive material. Overpopulation, soil exhaustion, and social unrest had been piling up for centuries. The system was too rigid to bend, so it broke. As the resources dwindled, the social contract didn't just fade, it snapped violently. The most chilling evidence of this societal collapse comes from the Pitex Batun region, specifically the city of Dos Pilas. Here, archaeology tells a story of sudden, sheer panic. In the year 761 AD, the city of Dos Pilas was under siege, and the residents engaged in a desperate construction project that signals the end of an era. They did not have time to quarry new stone. Instead, they ripped the facing stones from their own temples and the royal palace itself. The very monuments that celebrated the divine power of the Kuhul Ajar were dismantled to build two concentric walls of hasty, rough masonry that slashed right through the ceremonial plaza. This was an act of desecration born of survival. The king's house was torn apart to attempt to save the king's life. It reveals that the ideology binding the society together had already crumbled before the enemy even breached the gates. This moment marks a terrifying shift in the nature of Maya warfare. For centuries, conflict had been largely ritualistic, involving wars of capture between elites to secure high-ranking prisoners for sacrifice, leaving the peasantry and the agricultural infrastructure largely untouched. But in the 9th century, the rules of engagement vanished. It became total war. Cities were not just conquered, they were obliterated. Noble families were exterminated, ancestral tombs were looted, and commoners were slaughtered or displaced. The defensive walls at Dos Pilas created kill zones, narrow corridors designed to funnel attackers into concentrated spear fire. Yet, even these desperate measures failed. The city was breached, burned, and abandoned, never to be reoccupied. The war had moved from a contest for prestige to a brutal fight for basic survival, turning the Pitex Batun region into a wasteland of fortified hilltops and scorched fields. The collapse was not a simultaneous explosion, but a rolling blackout that darkened the Maya world city by city over the course of a century. It began in the southwest and moved north, like a slow-moving infection. Palenque, the jewel of Western architecture, was one of the first to fall, recording its last historical date in 799 AD. Yaxchilan followed shortly after in 808 AD. The silence then crept inward to the great superpowers. Tikal, which had stood for 1,000 years, erected its final monument, Stela 11, in 869 AD. After that, nothing. The complex calendar system, the long count, which had meticulously tracked time for millennia, simply stopped. In the immediate aftermath of the royal collapse, a haunting transformation took place within the abandoned city centers. Archaeology reveals a brief, tragic period of squatter occupation. With the divine kings gone and the priesthood dissolved, the common people, those who had survived the wars and the famine, moved out of their perishable huts and into the stone palaces of the aristocracy. We find evidence of crude cooking fires, lit directly on the stucco floors of royal throne rooms. They butchered animals and discarded refuse in the sacred plazas where immense rituals were once performed. It was a pragmatic reclamation of shelter by a desperate population. But this survival phase was fleeting. As the drought persisted and the agricultural systems completely failed without central management, even these squatters were forced to flee, leaving the great stone hulls of the cities to the encroaching jungle. It is a profound error to say the Maya civilization ended. It was transformed. The people did not vanish into thin air. They voted with their feet. As the southern cities turned into graveyards of ambition, a massive demographic shift occurred, moving the center of gravity northward to the Yucatan Peninsula, while the Petén rainforest saw its population plummet by an estimated 90%, leaving a silence that would last for a millennium. The northern lowlands were experiencing a renaissance. Cities like Uxmal and later Chichen Itza exploded in size, absorbing the waves of refugees fleeing the chaos of the south. This migration brought with it a radical political evolution. The survivors had learned a hard lesson. The centralization of power in a single divine holy lord was a recipe for disaster. In the new power centers of the north, we see a deliberate move away from the cult of personality. Art and architecture shifted to emphasize the multipal or joint rule. Palaces became more open. Council houses replaced exclusive royal temples, and governance became a shared responsibility among elite lineages. The Maya survived by reinventing themselves, discarding the rigid hierarchy that had strangled their ancestors to build a more resilient, commercial, and collective society in the north. In the centuries that followed the abandonment, the rainforest reclaimed what was taken from it. The great plazas, once swept clean by thousands of feet, were cracked open by the roots of ceiba and mahogany trees. By the time the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, the transformation was so complete that Hernán Cortés marched within a few miles of the ruins of Tikal and never saw them. The metropolis that had once rivaled the greatest cities of Europe was invisible, swallowed whole by the green sea of the jungle, preserving its secrets for over 1,000 years until rediscovered by modern explorers. Yet, the most enduring legacy of the Maya is not the stone left behind, but the people who survived. The Maya did not go extinct. Today, over 6 million Maya people live in Central America, speaking the languages of their ancestors and keeping their traditions alive. The collapse of the Classic period was the end of a specific political system, not the end of a people. However, the silent ruins of the Petén serve as a somber mirror for our modern world. They stand as a permanent warning that no civilization, no matter how advanced its engineering or how complex its economy, is immune to the laws of nature. The Maya pushed their environment to the breaking point to feed their growth, and when the climate turned against them, the center could not hold. It is a history written in stone, urging us to respect the delicate balance that sustains us. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past. If you want to continue uncovering the rise and fall of history's greatest empires, subscribe to our channel to relive heroic history pages. Until next time, remember, History is not just what happened. It is what is happening.